and welcome to the new episode of the PokePopCast. Pokemon just released, the beginning of November, updates to most, if not all, of their tournament guideline documents, including the penalty guidelines. And there are some changes in there, specifically the change in the penalty for drawing an extra card that is very significant. And I wanted to go over that in detail. We'll touch on the other changes, but we also will have at the pokegym.net website, I'll have an article written outlining those changes, and we'll touch on them here. But we'll put a link here to that article so you can go see the other changes. And we'll also have a link there referring to this video because it's good for judges and players to see both of these. All right, so the first tournament document that we will go over updates is the Tournament Operations Procedures document. Section 3.13, Late Player Registration. Specifically, Pokemon had left it previously to the tournament organizer's discretion about whether to add a player late to the tournament or not. Now they are giving a guideline that if championship points are involved, a player should not be added after the second round. Also in that same document, in Section 4, they are now mandating match slips at all premier events. Also that match records cannot be altered after the second subsequent round is paired. That is not really a change. Tom did not really allow that to happen anyway, so my guess is they're just putting that in writing to make it clear that it won't happen. In terms of match slips at all premier events, strictly speaking, that could include pre-releases. I don't think the intent there is really to mandate match slips at pre-releases. That's a very fun event, a very loose event. However, match slips are now required at all premier events, and that includes league challenges as well as league cups and anything larger than that. I'm sure there's a lot of places that run league challenges off of their computer without printing anything, and let alone match slips, and now you're going to have to print match slips. All right, there's a change in the tournament sanctioning regulations, and that change is actually reflected in a few other documents. So I'll touch on it here and just mention it in passing for the other documents. In Section 6, it clarifies that TOs can publish deck info as part of the streaming process. It basically goes over how decks can be revealed during a tournament if it is to promote the tournament through streaming or other methods, but not just if it is published, it has to be published for everyone to see. So you can't just give it to some players. Obviously, that would be highly unethical. But they do outline that with streaming being such a large part of the game now, and a large part of streaming, they show parts of players' decks. So that's basically clarifying that it is allowed. And next we come to the trading card game rules and formats. Section 4 goes over that same change about publishing deck information during the tournament. Section 5, they mention that for deck checks, players can be required to put their decks in order. This has actually been a fairly standard practice anyway, but again, they're putting it in writing just to have that documented. So not really a change per se, just an update in documentation. And in the penultimate document, before we get to penalty guidelines, general event rules. In general event rules, in Section 5, they again talk about publishing decks during the tournament for streaming and so forth. Section 8 notes, they mention that if players, and this I think was put in because of the increase in international tournaments, if a player has notes in a foreign language and a judge needs to have that translated, the player must provide translation. It's just a common sense thing, but just mandating, that since internationals, we have a lot more foreign players traveling to go to these events, just making sure that judges are able to understand what notes those players might have. In Section 10.1, conceding, they clarify that once the round has started, players cannot wait for other matches to finish or refer to standings from other matches from that round to decide whether they're going to concede or draw. Players are not going to be allowed to hunt for information to make a decision. If you want to hunt for that information, you do it between rounds, before the match starts. Once the match is going on, you need to make those decisions based on the status of your match and what you already know. Okay? Now, let's hit the penalty guidelines. Okay, so for the penalty guidelines part of this, I'm going to do these in reverse order. Number 9, Section 9, suspended players, they added a statement that suspended players cannot be spectators at an event. Previously, they had listed that they couldn't play in the event, they couldn't judge at the event, they couldn't volunteer at the event. Now they've added that they can't be a spectator at the event. This, again, is another thing that I think has already been in practice, but now it's documented, so that's a good thing. 7.42, rushing. Now, it's always been illegal to rush your opponent, and you could get penalties for that. However, they have clarified that they want judges to check for unsporting conduct where the rushing is meant to intimidate or distract the opponent. So that's a bit of an extra component there, where the rushing is not just to move things along, but to make the opponent not play well. And if that's the purpose, if that's determined to be the purpose of the rushing, then the penalty jumps way up to unsporting conduct, which is a disqualification. So in terms of players, advice for players here, if you feel that your opponent is slow playing, the proper way to handle that is to call a judge. We want the judges to be making this determination. Now, does that mean that you can't ask your player to play faster? No, it does not mean that. If your opponent is taking a long time to make a decision, you certainly can point out to them that you're taking way too long to make this decision. You need to move faster, or you will call a judge. But what they really want to get away from is where you're anticipating your opponent's move, such as you're putting damage counters on your Pokemon before they've attacked. You're chomping at the bit to draw your card, doing things that actively are distracting or upsetting to your opponent. And I've seen this in action, and you know it if you see it. So this is basically just a heads up that we don't want rushing, and it could bite a player who's engaging in it very badly. Next we have 7.4.1, slow play. A bit of a change here. Now, slow play has always had the possibility of escalating to prize loss, but it was given more generically as you can do this. Now Pokemon has said if you're seeing slow play and it's a second occurrence, you must go to prize loss on the second occurrence. They want the escalations for slow play to go faster than they have been going. So this is good news for players, those who are playing properly. If you find that you are a bit of a slow player and you're not doing it maliciously, again, it's important to realize that slow play is not the same thing as stalling. It does not assume that the player is doing it maliciously. It just means that they are taking longer than the guidelines give them to make moves. It could be they're thinking seriously about things. It could be that some players just do play slower than other players, but that's not fair to your opponent. And this is basically mandating that in a tournament, you must play in the guidelines. Now, does that mean that every single action has to be in the guideline time? And this is important for judges here. Does every single action have to be in the guideline times? No. If it's an important decision, a player can certainly be given a bit of leeway on the time of an important decision, but action after action after action where it's taking a long time to do these things, they must be called on slow play. It's not a one action you get called on slow play thing. It's action, action, action. Takes too long, takes too long, takes too long. They need to be called on slow play. It's not fair to the opponent that their time is being eaten up by the other player who either is having problems keeping pace, and the time to learn how to keep pace is in at league or practice, not at a large tournament. So they want games finished. It's also to have less draws, so we need to move those games along. Now the final penalty update, which I said I'd spend the most time on, is draw an extra card. Now the big change here, originally drawing an extra card was in the penalty guidelines in section 7.1.1, which is gameplay error minor. It is now in 7.1.2, gameplay error major. So that's a significant change right there. That changes the penalty from Tier 1 caution, Tier 2 warning for the initial occurrence, to Tier 1 warning and Tier 2 prize penalty. All right, that's a very significant change. So what's the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2? League challenges, league cups, and any local tournament or anything below that are Tier 1. Regionals and above are Tier 2 events. So the other big change is the fix. All right, so a penalty, when there's a gameplay error, there are two parts to the gameplay error. Number one is what's the penalty going to be for making the mistake, but number two is how do you fix the game state. Now previously, the fix to the game state had been that the card was revealed to the opponent, and then the card was placed back on top of the deck, which was a problem. With Pokemon, there was so much draw power and so much search power and deck recursion power that knowing what the next card in the deck was an incredible advantage. And there was a feeling among both players and a number of judges that players were willing to make the error, quote-unquote error, in order to gain information, and knowing that the initial penalty, at least, was going to be a slap on the hand of a caution or a warning. And so once per tournament, at least, you could get away previously with drawing an extra card and oops, now I know what my next card is. It could have a major impact on the gameplay. Either you have an ability or something that's going to draw you that card, or if it's a card that you don't want, you can shuffle it away playing an N or something like that. So there was an amazing ability to have an impact on the game state by accidentally drawing an extra card. This is a change that I think a lot of players are happy with. So now the new process is the extra card is shown, player sees it, the opponent sees it, and instead of just placing it back on top of the deck, it is shuffled away. So knowing that a card is in the deck is not such a big deal, but knowing that it's the next card is a big deal. So shuffling the card away is huge. Now, judges do need to be careful that if there was some effect that ordered the deck, say Gallade, the player had Gallade, and he's able to look at the top cards of his deck and order them in any order he wants, or there's a few other effects that can do that. If there is some effect, and this is the question and answer before you issue a penalty, before you do a fix, you need to make sure of all these potential things. So if there is some effect that has ordered the deck, that order should be maintained, and the card should not be shuffled away. So if they had used Gallade and they had ordered their deck, so they already knew what the top card was, that should not be shuffled away. That's an important distinction to make. So even though the penalty says to shuffle it away, in this particular case it should not be, because there's an overriding order to the deck that should be maintained. And I think a lot of judges, if they're not aware of that, could make that mistake, because the guideline does not specifically address that. So be aware. Are there times when you want to de-escalate the penalty? It is a guideline. These are penalty guidelines, not penalty rules. So are there times when you might want to de-escalate the prize loss penalty? Now bear in mind that the prize loss penalty is only initially going to be, for the first instance, going to be issued at a regional or higher. So if players are playing at a regional or higher, they should be experienced players, even in juniors and seniors. If you're at a lower tier event, you're going to start off with a warning, but multiple occurrences could escalate up to prize penalties. So are there times when you don't want to escalate or you want to de-escalate? A lot of judges feel that they should de-escalate these types of penalties with juniors and seniors, especially juniors, and I caution you against doing that. Juniors and seniors do cheat. They are not little angels. There are instances where it's a novice newbie player and they really don't know what they're doing, and you're not going to be encountering that at regionals too much, especially at the higher tables. If you are at a large event and you're at table 236 and it's round 7, those players are playing for fun. They're not really in the tournament to affect prizes or even standings at that point. If you wish to de-escalate at a high table number, that's appropriate. If you want to de-escalate a player who is really inexperienced, a junior who's really inexperienced, and you don't want to escalate up to a prize penalty because they're making multiple mistakes because they're new, you can do that. But if you're talking about players who are in contention, who are experienced players, and they know how to play, you should not be de-escalating the prize penalty. You should be issuing it. Now, the final thing to be aware of with this draw an extra card penalty is there is now a potential issue with some of the new cards that came out in the new set, the counter cards, Counter, Catcher, and Counter Energy. These are cards, and there are other cards in the format, especially if you're playing Expanded, where there are cards that give different effects depending on if you're behind on prizes or not, or you can't even play them unless you're behind on prizes. So this now, drawing an extra card, potentially gives a player an easy way to activate these cards. And there is a concern that a player might get that penalty on purpose. They'll lose a prize, right? They'll draw an extra card, they'll lose a prize, but that will now allow them to play Counter Catcher to bring up a GX or EX Pokemon and get 2 prizes. So this is something that judges need to be on the lookout for. Now, one thing that you should do is when you're issuing the penalty is you should just make it a standard practice of informing the opponent that with a prize card penalty or a multi-prize card penalty, drawing the extra prizes are optional. Okay? Now, you don't want to hit them over the head with it, but you do want to inform them as a matter of course that it is the penalty will be recorded either way, and we will be tracking it. You may draw an extra prize as the penalty, or if you choose not to, you do not have to. Just leave it at that. You don't want to coach, but you are stating what their options are, and that's fair. The other thing you want to do is hang out a bit and see what happens next in the match. The player now immediately uses that opportunity to use a card that couldn't have been activated until that happened, and that now has a major swing on the game. You want to be aware that you may want to bring your head judge in to discuss this, to determine if this might have happened on purpose. Because if the determination that it happened on purpose is made, then now we're not talking about a prize penalty or a game loss. We're talking about a disqualification for cheating. Because drawing a penalty on purpose in order to impact the game state to gain advantage is cheating. And judges should be on the lookout for this. Now, you may or may not determine in a particular instance that it's cheating, but you definitely want to note it at least. And if the same thing happens again, then you probably want to make that determination. It's too much of a coincidence for players to again and again draw into a penalty that then wins them the game. It's a potential danger to the legitimacy of the tournament if players get away with that. So this is one reason why it's important for prize penalties and above to get either the head judge or the second involved. So now that this is a prize penalty, you are getting a head judge or a second involved, and for those who are going to be head judges and seconds at large events, look for this. Don't just treat it as, oh, he drew an extra card, he's getting a prize penalty, I approve it, and move on. Pay attention to these, because these could turn into bad situations that really hurt the integrity of the event. Okay, we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna have this written up at the PokeJam.net, so look for it there, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.